Hello and welcome to Kentucky Afield Live Facebook Edition. Today I have Gabe Jenkins here with me. He is the Deer and Elk Program Coordinator here at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. This is not our live call-in show. We will be having a live hunting call-in show that'll be taking place on September the 16th, and tune in this Saturday night for our live non-game call-in show. Today's all about deer.
Yeah, it's upon us. The season's here, Chad. It's hard to believe we're a couple weeks away from deer hunting.
Right around the corner. I know a lot of people are already shooting their bows and checking their deer cameras.
Yep.
Hopefully by now their food plots are out and ready to go, and starting to get some good pictures coming in.
I've seen a lot of pictures, a lot of people getting excited about it. We've had good rain, so if you got your food plots in, should be good and green come season start.
We're going to talk about all kinds of topics. We're also going to take questions via Facebook Live, so send us your questions if you like. There's no set time today. We plan on going 30, 40 minutes, however long you stay interested. We are going to talk about a couple topics in particular, and we're going to pick up the topic of EHD here in a little bit. We're getting a lot of questions, a lot of concerns. I'm sure Gabe's getting a lot of questions. We're going to talk about where we're seeing that at currently in the state, and what the myths are with EHD, and what we see doing to the deer herd long term. But first, we're going to talk about a couple other things. What's new with deer hunting this year in Kentucky?
Oh, a couple things. As far as seasons and dates and all that, same as normal, just your normal calendar shift. Archery seasons are going to come in September the 2nd. All the zones and counties are all the same as they were last year, so bag limits and your zone status for your county is all good. The main changes that folks need to be aware of are some public lands changes that we've made. Added some quota hunts, taken a few quota hunts away, opened up a lot more opportunity in the bluegrass region specifically for hunters to be able to go out and enjoy our public lands.
That's one thing I continue to see, new hunting opportunities for public hunting. Tell me a few of those, especially tell me which ones would be good for bow hunting or which ones are quota hunts only.
Okay, a couple that we actually just put a press release out that Stevens Creek is a new area. We expanded on Owen, Kleber WMA in Owen County. Some of our more traditional areas people like to hunt, Peabody in western Kentucky, Ballard, H&H is another one. So those are kind of our the ones people like to frequent and go to.
So for an individual that is that's planning a deer hunt this year and they're going to hunt public lands, where would you tell them to go on our website to find that information, to get all of our WMA laid out and what all the rules and restrictions are? Where do you go to find that?
Great question. So we put a lot of stuff on our website, maps and statistics and success rates, everything we can provide to our hunters to make informed decisions. So fw.ky.gov is the website. You can go straight to hunting and then deer and then public lands, so you can look at all those successes. Then there's also a section called maps, and you can look at wildlife management areas. You can look at all those across the state. We actually have a informal app that you can now download and has all of the properties and the boundaries on your smartphone, which is really cool.
That is, I've been asked that question 2 or 3 times. I didn't realize that we had already launched that.
Yes.
I have some people asking me all the time. People ask me all the time, hey, how do I know when I'm on or off the boundary lines? And on your smartphone, if you're getting a cell signal, you should be able to access that exact boundary line, correct?
Correct, and it's actually even better than that. If you download the app and actually upload your WMA or where you're going, it will work. So it'll show that on your screen. Your phone works off of a GPS that's internal, so whether it has service or not, it'll plot your location if you actually have that uploaded and you're on, we'll pick Kleber WMA, and you'll be able to see it with the boundaries and the topo. All that's right there. So that was something new we launched last year. We didn't tell a lot of people because we wanted to work out the bugs, but it's out there. It's great, and we think a lot of it.
That could come in really handy for trailing a deer too at night, because I'm sure, does it drop a breadcrumb trail where you're going?
Yep, yeah, you can track your locations, drop pins, all that, and if you wanted to go in and drop a pin at all your different stand locations or blind locations, you can do that as well. So
as far as nutrition, obviously we do a lot of planning of food plots and things like that on our WMAs. What are you seeing and what are you hearing across the state with other forms of food, nut loads and that type of thing?
Right, so kind of just general overall deer stuff. The deer are in fantastic shape this year. We had a very mild winter. I mean, winter was almost non-existent. We had a fantastic acorn crop last year. Both of those factors, wet spring, pretty much a wet summer, all have been great conditions for bigger deer, lots of deer, and healthy deer. And that's all 3 good things we like to be able to say when it's going on.
And of course, I'm traveling the state quite a bit. I'm seeing a lot of mothers with 2 fawns,
Yes.
several with 3 fawns, and that is an indication of overall doe health, correct?
Overall doe health and plus habitat. I mean, you can have the healthiest doe in the world, but if she doesn't have a place to birth and that fawn to survive those first couple weeks of life, it's important. So that tells us we've got a nice balance, and what you're seeing and hearing, we are as well, and numbers look really good going into the season this year.
We're going to get to some questions we have here. We've got quite a few comments coming in. Let's talk about the other big topic right now, and that is EHD.
All right.
What is EHD?
All right, so it's a mouthful. EHD is short for epizootic hemorrhagic disease. Lots of folks like to refer to that as blue tongue as well, but it's a different strain of the disease. The biggest thing that, we say EHD or blue tongue. The blue tongue, a lot of people think about that it makes sense, it's easy to remember, and plus, actually, when a deer dies and you find them, their tongue will be blue and they've lost oxygen, and so that's kind of how it got its name.
So, I think everyone's seen the videos of a couple of the bucks that are kind of stammering around, and so what causes that, and how prevalent is it in the state of Kentucky this year?
So we are seeing a significant outbreak in the state. We see EHD every year. Parts of it, it can be severe in places, and it can be almost non-existent. So we expect that as managers, and we realize that it can and will. And you think EHD, everybody has horror stories of 2007, 2012, and remembers what that did. And so that happens. And it's very much on social media now. We've seen that, and those are kind of the last stages of the disease. They're exposed. They've lost their fear of humans. They're on their final stages of life, and they really act kind of not normal, folks people say.
So they don't have the fear of humans. They just kind of meander around.
Yep.
So do they run a fever and
They run a big fever, and that's why a lot of people will see them. They're in water. They go to water because they're hot, and so they're running extremely hot. They go there, and they're circling. And if you think of an adult or person with a fever, a lot of times they're just kind of loopy and stumbling around. It's the same concept with deer. They're really out of their mind in those last few stages of life. And the circling was one that it can be indicative of potentially other diseases that cause that circling. And that's something that with the technology that we have now, everybody's got smartphones and videos. We didn't see that circling 10 years ago, and just didn't have a smartphone. Not everybody was capable video capabilities right then and there.
Some of these videos I've seen, they've gotten pretty close, and it's still a wild animal.
Correct.
And you may think that animal's sick and it's wounded, but to get really, really close to that animal still can be pretty dangerous.
For sure. I mean, we advise folks, don't approach it, don't try to touch it, don't try to give it something to eat or something to drink.
Don't be giving them Tylenol.
No, it's not gonna, we don't want anybody to get hurt, and that has the potential, because even though they look out of their minds and not healthy, it's very possible they could come to, or they hear something, their visual stimulus is there, their hearing is all there, and you don't want to be caught in the middle of that.
So we're getting a lot of questions. We're going to get to a bunch of questions that are coming up. But let's talk a little bit more about EHD here in the state of Kentucky this year, because I remember how bad it hit certain counties in 2007. And would you say 2012?
12 was also a bad year.
So you're seeing 7, 12, 17. This is every 4 or 5 years is the big outbreaks, but we have small outbreaks every single year. Why is that?
So a couple things. A lifetime of a deer is one. They live on average 3 to 5 years, and so there are deer that are exposed to HD that survive. They produce antibodies, and then they pass those on to their offspring if they're female, so that you have some immunity built up in the herd. So that's a good thing when you have some exposure that they're able to survive. But also it's just kind of cyclic. We know it happens every 5 to 8 years about. It can be associated with drought. 07 and 12 we had a big drought. We don't have drought this year. That's one of the factors that can lead to it, but it's not the one thing it's got to have drought. So it happens, and we were expecting one any time.
So once a deer has EHD, it can survive.
It can.
And if it does survive, it will not be susceptible to EHD again, or has a reduced risk?
It has a reduced risk. So it's just like any disease that you get, that you build up antibodies in. If you're not exposed in a couple of years, you've lost that ability to fight off the infection, kind of like the flu or something like that.
So deer is there certain levels of EHD? Like, can you have a fawn or a doe that maybe has some fawns that you can't tell it's got something wrong with it, but it may have been exposed? For
sure. That happens where they get a light exposure. That deer appears to be completely normal, and it will go through its entire life, and you would never know, but she's been exposed of some sort. It can be a very acute form where they get it, and they're bitten at a severe rate and they're dead 24 to 72 hours. That's the most common type that we're seeing right now. And there's some that can be bitten, and if they're really healthy and it's a low dose, that they can really get bad off but survive it. A lot of times if you're out hunting in November or December and you see some deer that are kind of walking tender-footed, their hoofs will actually slough completely off.
Yeah, I want to talk about that here in a second, because that's like for the next year for a person who's hunting a deer and finds that, and you can suspect a lot of that next year. But I want to get back to the disease a little bit. You've mentioned bitten. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little more about how this disease is transferred and what's biting them.
Good question. Right. So the disease is transferred through a midge, a little no-see-um, a little gnat that's associated with riverbanks, mud flats, and water. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. The deer go to the riparian area because it's cool this time of year. That's where they get something to drink. That's also where the midges are. They breed in the mud. So they go there, they're exposed to the midge bites the deer, and then they're infected at that point. So not all those midges are all infected. It takes the midge to be exposed somehow to the virus, and it can be exposed in a variety of different ways, from biting a positive deer and so forth.
So anyone who's spent much time on a riverbank or a creek bank has had these little bitty bugs on them. Mm-hmm. Has there ever been an instance of this disease being transferred to humans?
No, not at all. It's a question we get a lot. What's the concerns on, what if I get bitten by a midge? There's no concern there at all.
What about other animals?
That's never been documented to affect pets or anything else. Another question we've heard is, well, what if I consume that venison, or one of my pets consumes a sick deer? There is not a concern at all. What we usually recommend, if you're a hunter, if the deer is behaving normally and you shoot that deer and see nothing wrong with it, it's completely fine to eat. Mm-hmm. If it's circling and it doesn't act right and you were to harvest that deer, I would advise against eating it, but that's kind of how we usually recommend things.
So it's pretty much limited to deer and elk, right? But we've not seen any documented cases this year with that?
There's very, very, very limited, and it just doesn't happen that very often. So, it's mainly whitetail and mule deer.
So some other questions that I'm getting right here. What can a farm owner or landowner do to help reduce this risk on their property?
Good question. It's the most common thing we get. What can we do to prevent it? Unfortunately, there's nothing. There's nothing we can do. It's fact of nature. It's how nature, the course it takes. And so for us, we'll just have to sit back and wait for it. Nature will fix itself, and it fixes itself by the first frost. Middle of October, we'll get a frost. That'll kill those midges, and that will end the outbreak.
That's another question. So how much time do we have? Because we didn't have much of a winter last year. Mm-hmm. Has that been a factor? And probably has something to do with it.
It could potentially, yes. That's one thing we've talked with the lab that's doing this. It could be something with it. We had a higher survival rate of these midges. The one thing about HD for us is the midge that carries the disease isn't really natural to Kentucky. It doesn't really pop in this part of the state or in Kentucky at all until we get really dry this time of year. So it's here for a few, and its life cycle runs, and then it's gone.
So when this happened back in 2007, the area down around Land Between the Lakes is what really got hit pretty hard in some of the northern counties. I remember people calling, maybe it's 2012, I may be getting my years mixed up.
2012 is when it was in the west.
2012, people were calling saying you can smell them when you're fishing, mm-hmm. They're dying all over the lakes.
Yeah.
I was down at LBL yesterday. The deer population is fantastic.
Right.
So it really does recover very quickly.
For sure. We can grow deer. That's one thing. We have a fantastic state, lots of habitat. 07 was by far the worst statewide. We had it in all the counties. It knocked back some populations pretty hard, but 2-3 years, depending on the severity, or it could just be a year. They're super productive critters, and that's what's great about deer.
Well, and if you've got a piece of property and you spend all this time managing it, having a year or two that may seem down, it's not something you want to hear, but it's not a long-term issue.
No.
Let's talk a little bit about this year's EHD issue. So how many counties do we have documented EHD this year?
We're probably in the 20 to 30 county range at this point. It's an evolving process, so we know that we're getting reports daily of a new county and trying to get out there and verify all those right now.
So we're looking at 20, 30 counties. The map that I've seen is predominantly southeastern Kentucky this time. Correct.
The epicenter was really where we started getting the reports was in mid-July, around Magoffin, Floyd, Letcher County is kind of in that southeastern quarter. And from there, it's moved northward and westward, and so kind of in the 64, 75 corridor. One thing that we can also say is we're not alone in this. Kentucky's got it, but we're also getting reports in Tennessee and Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio. It seems to all be up and down the Appalachian Mountains, so we are not the outlier.
So we're a couple weeks away where thousands and thousands of hunters are going to take to the woods for the opening of archery season. We're probably going to start getting some more reports if we don't have a frost by then, which we probably won't.
Yep.
When that happens and a person encounters that deer, how should they handle that deer?
So, good question. For us, we need to know about that deer. That's the most important thing that we can tell, is that if you find a deer on your property that's died in some odd way, find it around water that kind of suggests EHD, please let us know. As managers, we need to know the severity. And we're not in the field. We rely on our hunters to tell us what they're seeing. So pick up the phone, get on call us, send us an email. We have information on our homepage and also on our Facebook account, every media outlet that we have for people to report those, the county that you see the deer, how many deer that are sick or dead, and that helps us make informed decisions for the future next year.
So there's a form that you can go to Facebook or on the website. How do they find that on the website? What's it under?
It's under additional information right on the homepage.
Okay, so additional information, you go there, you fill out a few questions, and then you submit it to us.
Yeah, very simple, and you don't have to do anything, and we'll capture that as well. Try to fill out as much contact info especially if you've got a deer that's sick, that's not dead yet. We'd love to try to hook up with you and get out and collect a sample to confirm that's what it is.
So that's a couple questions we're getting. If you run upon a deer that looks like they have something like EHD or they have EHD, they want to know how they handle that. Can that deer be put down?
We usually advise let nature take its course. Just because it doesn't look right or it's lost its fear of humans doesn't mean it can't recover. In most cases, it won't. But we talked about that previously, that they could get over it. So my advice would be to contact your local biologist or local officer, and you can find that on our website as well under My County Contact with their contact information. Call them, shoot them an email, and say, hey, I've got this with some sort of road, a way for us to find it.
We've talked about 3 or 4, maybe 5 of the counties. You got a printout there.
I do.
Run through a couple of the other counties. I'm getting a lot of other people I'm sure they've got other areas that they're concerned about.
Yep.
I'm hearing things from Wayne County, Rockcastle County. Do these counties have EHD confirmed as well?
Okay, so some of the counties, I'm just going to kind of look at our map here. Carter and Floyd County are our highest counties of reports, followed by Pike, Knott, Breathitt, Lee, Clay, Letcher, Knox. As you move kind of west, we have random reports. Pulaski County is the county that has the most to the west. We have a few out in western Kentucky, but it seems to be more of your normal, a few here, a few there that we normally expect. But it's pretty much everything east of 75 and then south of 64 as it moves on up towards the river. So Carter, Greenup County would be our most northern county where we have reports of right now.
But let's just be honest, it'll probably spread, right?
Yep, it will.
It's going to hit some additional counties, and as more people get out, as the weather starts getting nicer, more people spend more time in the woods, you're probably going to see it a little more frequently. But that doesn't mean that all's lost. Your deer season's not over. We've had some pretty good years following EHD. Yes, it's going to have a small impact, especially on the counties that are hit the hardest. But there's still going to be good hunting in the state of Kentucky.
And that's one thing that I wanted to point out is that all is not lost. You can actually see in some drainages where you'll have a pretty significant die-off, get in the hill or hop over the mountain to the next drainage, and you literally won't see anything. The deer are there, they're acting and behaving normal. So yeah, it could be happening in your back door, but it's also right across the road or not too far down the road. They could be completely fine. So it seems sometimes to be drainage specific or a certain creek or something like that. So just because it's really bad in your county doesn't mean it's countywide.
If a deer makes it through and someone harvests that deer this year, we've already talked about it being safe to eat. Mm-hmm. What are characteristics that we could see on a deer that would tell us that deer probably had survived EHD?
Good question. So pretty significant weight loss. They can look pretty thin. If you were to harvest that animal and butcher it, you're not going to see much fat underneath the hide. The hoofs will actually slough or completely actually slough off to where they don't even have a hoof. You know, I had a deer a couple of years ago in Anderson County that its hoofs had sloughed off, and it would come in and come by and literally lay down and eat laying down because it's, you know, and it survived, and that's what was really cool with it. We knew that deer, and we were concerned about it, but it made it. They're tough critters. That's the cool thing about a deer.
I've actually seen some pictures. You actually harvested an EHD deer that made it through 1 year.
Right.
And really grew us an impressive antlers after that.
It was a great deer. You know, he was 3.5 when he was exposed. We thought he'd passed. I know he was very visible and then was gone. And then showed up the following year and had gotten a little bit bigger, but not what you would have expected from a 3 to 4. But he still grew antlers that were better than what he was the year before, and was a fantastic whitetail that I was.
So
really...
these deer you see some around, they may not make it, but some of them very well may make it through. Yeah. And if it's a doe, it could very well be passing on those immunities to its offspring if she makes it.
You know, and that's one thing we look at in a lot of our research when we're out in the field and collecting specimens and things is blood, and we can look at exposure, and something we do every year to try to see are we ripe for an outbreak, meaning do we have any antibodies in our herd, and so that does help.
So your deer that you harvested that was 4 years old, in year 5 or 6, 7, would it have ever grown its hooves back to its full state?
It's had its hooves back, and it was fine. I mean, you would have not known anything was wrong with that deer. The only reason we knew is we had a relationship with him. We knew what he was last year.
So if the hoof sloughing you'll see this year, and if you happen to see that next year, then it means you've had an outbreak of EHD in 2018.
Right. Well, where you'll see it is mainly this fall. So our gun hunters, our late archery hunters, or late muzzleloaders, you'll see that hoof have sloughed off, or if you actually get the hoof, there'll be a thick ridge or a ridge line on all the hoofs, and it should be on all of them, where you can see that they were exposed to a really high temperature that sloughed off, and now it's regrowing, kind of like your toe or your toenail.
So if you harvest a deer that has that issue or has EHD, still no concerns with eating it?
No, not one bit at all. You know, like I said before, if it acted normal, you know, we do not think of any concern there.
I'm getting a couple questions that are really interesting questions, because we're going to answer these questions. They don't completely relate to EHD, but we're talking about transporting a deer over state lines. People are asking me, if a deer has EHD, can it be transported over state lines? Talk to me a little bit about transporting a deer over state lines, regardless of EHD or any other issue. Right.
So regardless, you know, as Kentucky residents, if you're coming to Kentucky and you harvest a deer and you want to take it outside the state, whether you're a resident or non-resident, and however harvest a deer or an elk for that matter here and move out, the biggest thing I can tell you is know the laws of the state you're going home to, and know the laws of the state you're traveling through. Many states have restrictions to where you can't import entire carcasses. It's really important if you're hunting in a CWD positive state, like West Virginia or Missouri or Illinois, some of our border states. You know, if you travel across the border and go into Ohio is another one's positive. You harvest the deer, you cannot legally bring that entire carcass back. You have to bone that meat, cape that skull if it's a buck, bring back finished products, no infectious material like the brain, the spinal cord, and leave that in that state.
So if you take a deer from a county that is EHD positive, or CWD positive, and you bring that back into the state of Kentucky and you take it to a taxidermist, it's not going to end up real well, is it?
No, and that's an illegal animal. I mean, you've broken a handful of violations, and we want our hunters to be good stewards of the resource, and we don't want to be moving high infectious material across the country and potentially bringing in CWD into Kentucky.
We've been fairly strict on that here in the state of Kentucky, and it may very well be one of the reasons why we still don't have a case here in Kentucky. Right.
And we want to do everything we can to protect our resource, and informing our hunters, trying to put as many rules and regulations to keep CWD out is what we want to do.
Still a lot of people asking about counties and what counties are affected. I know we did a rundown on that a while ago. We're going to do this kind of like school closings. So you've got a list of counties. You can turn that around and show the map, show the camera if you don't mind. And
this map will also be on our website, so where you can see this and update it. We'll try to update it as much as we can.
I'm getting a lot of questions on how can they keep up with this information. So this is on our website?
It should be. If it's not, we're trying to get it up. It will be updated as much as we can.
Okay.
The reports are coming in a lot, and so it's hard for us to try to keep that going, but it will be up there.
So we are putting it online. It will be available, and it will be updated from time to time as well. So, big picture, it's a terrible deal. It is a disease. Mother Nature is not the nicest.
It can be cruel. Yeah.
Not real nice.
Unfortunately.
Bad things happen, unfortunately. Big picture, if you're a hunter in the state of Kentucky, if you had a piece of property that has been affected with EHD and you're seeing a lot of dead deer, you might want to change farms. Other than that, would you change anything you were planning on doing this year for hunting?
Our hunters are our managers. Some counties we look at zone 1, there's a lot of deer, but that might not be the case where you're at. I mean, deer aren't uniformly across the county, the landscape. So you have to make those decisions as the landowner and what you would take off of your property or your hunters that you work with. So, I encourage you to get out, beat around the bushes, see what you got. If you want to run some cameras just to get a feel for density, that's always a great thing. And we ultimately make the decision you think is best for your needs and for your herd there on the properties that you hunt. So for us, we won't know the severity until it's over. And the important part is they're calling us, letting us know. It's not going to be the end of the world, but it can be pretty painful.
I know that you wasn't in this exact same position in 2007, 2012. Give me an idea of the number of counties and cases this year versus those past years. Do you remember?
Oh, I remember 07.
2007 was
07 was pretty rough, and it was every county in 07.
The woman that had your job then didn't hardly come out of her office. It just said EHD office because for an entire summer she got nothing but EHD calls, which was everyone thought the sky was falling.
Yeah, and it wasn't. Yeah, we realized it really impacted, and it took a while for some of our counties that were kind of low density to recover.
Later, we recategorized some counties in different zones numbers because of EHD.
And in some places, it might have brought the density down to a level that might have been a little better habitat-wise. And just looking at it, our best Boone and Crockett year that we know of as far as Boone and Crockett potential and number of Boone and Crockett bucks harvested was 2011. We harvested 73 that we knew of. That was 4 years from EHD outbreak. So it probably brought our herd back to a little bit better of a balance. Those deer that survived had fawns. Those fawns had fantastic habitat for the next 3 or 4 years, 5 years, and boom, we had a flush of really quality whitetails.
2012, 2007,
Yep.
Could be right on knocking on the door for another really good year for big antler production.
Correct.
Pair that up with good nut crops last year, what looks to be pretty good this year, and a very mild winter. I'm looking forward to this deer season.
Me too. We talk a lot about EHD, but yeah, I'm ready. I mean, it's everything looking good.
So let's do a recap of last year's numbers.
Okay.
How did last year's hunting season turn out as far as harvest, and what was the expectations prior to this EHD outbreak? What were the expectations for this year's season? Because I'm sure they're still the same.
Right, and they are. Last year we were the third highest harvest on record, coming off the highest harvest on record. I mean, the good old days for deer hunting is right now. Yeah. A lot of folks talk about the good old days, and you're living in them if you're a deer hunter. So lots of deer, good quality, lots of opportunity here in the state. You can't ask for better hunting opportunity.
And you can gather a lot from how many deer are taken, but it becomes a little bit exponential because once you hit that threshold where most people have taken a deer, a lot of people elect to not take a second one. It doesn't really give you a good idea of opportunity.
Right.
Because a lot of people who take, they may take their first deer and they may not take another deer because for whatever reason, freezer might be full, out of tags, whatever. But may quit hunting for that matter, after they've taken their first deer. So we did have a really good season a couple years ago, coming off of third highest last year. Even with the EHD taking place, you suspect we're probably going to be right there in those numbers again?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be good. One thing we always talk about is weather on those key weekends of opening weekend gun, that second and third weekend. That really drives the harvest. We got some nice cool weather that will really help. Mast, acorn, hickory production. I know our staff and our folks are getting out looking at it. I've been out a few times, don't really have a good feel for what it's going to look like statewide, and that does affect deer movement, deer behavior. But for the folks who like to hunt food plots, green fields, things like that, if you got those in, they should be green and flush, so that opportunity should be there. So if we don't have a great acorn crop, you can look for those deer to be in those fields and foraging on some of those green fields.
I'm getting a couple more questions coming in here talking about the map. The map apparently is not up yet. We're going to work on that. We'll get that up soon. We are going to continue to update that map. We're also hearing some people that are saying, hey, we've got a confirmed case in my county and it may not be on the map, we may not know about it.
Right.
It's going to happen faster than what we're going to get the reports. We need you to fill out the forms online, pick up the phone and give us a call. Someone here is asking about Lawrence County. It was actually a deer that was shot by a deputy sheriff. Do we have
Lawrence County? We've got reports in Lawrence
Okay.
County. The one thing I'll say, Chad, is this report was literally sent to me before I walked in here,
Okay.
and we had just updated it from 2 days ago to try to get ready for this. So I know we're working on it, trying to get things up to date as quick as possible.
Well, we've answered a bunch of questions. I don't see anything else on here that, if you got anything else you want to get to us really quick. Again, I'm here with Gabe Jenkins. He is the deer and elk coordinator here for the state of Kentucky. You've been doing this job for a couple years now,
Yeah.
so you have some experience. You know the sky's not falling because you've been through EHD before, right?
Right, and yeah, I wasn't coordinator in 07 or 12, but I was here as a deer biologist and saw that, worked with our staff, and we'll see this through the end.
And it's a gruesome deal when you walk through your property and you look out and you see a creek and there's 4 or 5 dead deer laying on it. Deer, this time of year, when people will think, oh my gosh, that's all of them, because they don't move in the heat of the day.
Right.
You don't see them until right before dark or very early in the mornings. And then all of a sudden you see 4 or 5 and you're like, that's all the deer I've seen. Probably have a lot more than
Yeah,
that.
there's definitely more than that. And one thing, Chad, that we didn't speak about is, a question that I get a lot. Does it affect bucks more than it does does? Or what about my fawns?
I'll tell you what, let's go through some myths.
Okay.
Some myths of EHD. Tell me some myths about EHD.
That one right there, it kills all the big bucks and doesn't affect anybody else. That's not the case at all. We remember those big bucks because they were big, but you might not remember the doe or the small yearling buck there. But it doesn't affect the males or the females any differently. It might be a little bit harder on the males than the female, mainly because of their habitat use. A lot of the bucks like to hang out in the riparian area. That's the coolest place in the woods. So they're going to seek those places, and that's where the midge is. That's positive with HD, and then they get bitten. So their susceptibility is equal. It just might be more to do with the habitat use of a buck compared to a doe. And then usually fawns are fairly adaptable, and we don't see a lot of that. So it's mainly adult deer, a year and a half or older that get it. But
Even in humans, babies and kids can deal with the temperature better than,
Oh, yes.
than adults. So it very well could be a similar situation.
and it has to do with health too. Sometimes a 5, 6, 7-year-old deer isn't as healthy as a 2-year-old or yearling. They've not had to deal with if they're female fawns, and so that fawn's not pulling them down, and they can handle more because they're healthier.
A couple more questions about farmers, I guess, that people that have goats and sheep, concerns about that.
No concerns there at all. That's
Never been a case where it's been
not that I'm
transferred?
aware of. Not for
Okay.
EHD.
And people asking if you have any idea why a part of the state with the lowest deer population, typically we get most of our zone 3s and 4s are kind of down in that area.
Right.
Any reason why that may have been the area that was hit?
No, it's a good question, and we don't know that. The point that it's happening all in the mountains is kind of what we're not unique to this. So why is it happening in East Kentucky right now? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know that. It's just that the midge was there, the virus was there, and they were exposed, and probably were naive to the disease. We probably didn't have any antibodies. I can't think of really any outbreaks that we've had in 4 or 5 years in Eastern Kentucky. So. That's where the epicenter started, just like in 07 and 12. It had to start somewhere and then, move back and forth. So time will tell.
So questions about rain helping or hurting EHD. Some people are saying here, asking if the rain's going to help. Some are actually saying that they've recently had some rain and it is helping.
Right. So we definitely had a flush of rain in East Kentucky the last 3 or 4 days. Will it help? Don't know. What we saw in previous years was rain would make it subside, but unfortunately, when you get rain and you get the rivers and the lakes to come up and then they recede, it creates mud banks. And where these midges breed is in the mud. So it can make it better temporary, and then when those waters recede, there's more mud, and then it can make it explode. So maybe. I don't know.
We need a hard frost.
Yes, we need an all hard frost, and that will put an end to it.
Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today on Facebook Live here with Kentucky Afield. Very glad to have you here with me.
Pleasure.
You've straightened up a lot of questions and concerns I've had about EHD. I'm sure that you've had a lot of questions out there as well. Keep logging in, checking in on the map, and we'll continue to get that updated. Also, make sure that if you do run into a deer that has EHD in your area, that you do go on there and fill that form out and report that.
One thing we'll say that we also have a fantastic resources on EHD. If you want to get on and read about the disease, it's on our website as well. Some of the things we covered, and that map is all right there for our viewers to inform themselves as well.
Well, thanks again. Remember, this is not, as much as we went over, this is not our fall hunting call-in show. That's going to take place on September the 16th. And if you have a question about birds, snakes, lizards, mussels, whatever, the non-game show is this Saturday night, 8:30. We're going to start taking questions here in a couple days, so get your questions ready. Thanks again. Appreciate it. Stay tuned. We may be doing more of these Facebook Live shows, and let us know what you think about them. Thank you.
Thanks.